So just for those of you, how many are here for the first time? Okay, there's a few. Just briefly describe what this class is about. We are studying really, it's a progression. The class is about apologetics, which means the defense of the Christian faith. And we're going through a progression here. I've structured the class according to something that I actually went through in my own life, which was a search for the truth. And so I've structured the class as if you were searching for the truth and you are considering your options. And so we're starting out with a wide open world, and then we're going to look at what the major options are, which are the 6 worldviews that are plausible to 21st century human beings. And we're going to look at every one of them, and we're going to narrow it down only using logic to theism, the belief in a supernatural, infinite, personal, holy God. And then we're going to look at the options within theism, which are Islam, Christianity, and Judaism. And through that, we're going to narrow it down to Christianity. And so at that point in the class becomes a class on general apologetics, or the defense of the Christian faith, the reasons for faith. And we're going to look at the reasons for Christian faith. And once we then reach a conclusion at the end of that point that Christianity is true, or more specifically that the Bible is the Word of God, then we will see what the Bible has to say about God. So at that point, the class will evolve into a theology class, and we will be studying the most wonderful topic, as far as I'm concerned, in all of theology, and that is the attributes of God. And through that, we'll get to know God better. So that's where we're going in this class. So, if you're with us for the first time, you haven't missed much. In fact, I had a couple people say, "Come on, let's get into the meat," and that's a very difficult balance that I'm trying to maintain of not going too slow or going too fast. Generally, that may be the first time I've ever had the complaint, "Let's get into the meat." The complaint is usually, "I can't keep up with all this. You're just bombarding me with so much information," And my wife pointed out to me we have a more educated congregation here than we're used to, which is a blessing. But at the same time, I pointed out to her that this is not like the advanced adult Sunday school class. This is the adult Sunday school class, and we have people at all levels. And so I want to not leave any, George Bush did not want to leave any child behind. I don't want to leave any Sand Harbor congregant behind, And so I'm going to keep trying to maintain that balance, but I just want to make sure that I'm not leaving anybody behind. So I appreciate the input last week, and if I'm still not getting into the meat fast enough for you, let me know. If I've left you behind, or if you need me to slow down a bit, let me know, because this is, quite frankly, true confessions, this is the area I feel quite confident in myself as a teacher, except that I do struggle in the area of usually I will sort of come on with too much information, and I'm trying not to do that. I'm trying to grow as a teacher and make sure that you can really assimilate it. But if I'm overcompensating, keep me posted on that. So, okay, now that we're moving into it here, we're looking at our outline. And I did hand it out at the beginning. Does anybody still need, anybody that's come in? Okay. Let me just make sure you're giving the right one. Yeah, that's the right one. Okay, great. I do have my entire outline for this class prepared, but I'm only handing it out as we get to it, so that you're not going ahead and getting distracted by what's coming. So, in 2 weeks, on page 1 there, we've gone through Roman numerals 1 through 3. But I did share my testimony, which took up pretty much the whole first Sunday. And so you haven't missed much if this is your first time. But now we're going to start speeding it up a bit. And we're coming to Roman numeral 4, which is ground rules for the search. And again, this is, I've encouraged you to encourage non-believers to come, and I've had quite a bit of success in the past giving this class to non-believers. And so I'm always bearing in mind there might be a non-believer here, which is what I want, but of course you're benefiting totally from this because we're teaching all the areas I mentioned before which Christians need to know. But it's just the way I've structured it that makes it more accessible to a non-believer, because basically we're starting out, we're not assuming anything. We're not assuming that Christianity is true. We're not assuming that the Bible is the Word of God. We're using a logical process that any human being should be able to consent is reasonable. Ultimately, it will lead us to that, but it's not like it's a rigged game. It's not like, well, I'm a Christian and I want to lead people to Christ, so I'll make it appear like this is objective, but I'll rig the questions and answers that we deal with until it eventually leads to Christianity. It's nothing of the kind. As I've shared with you before, I followed these rules, and the last thing I wanted to be was a Christian, but I ended up being a Christian because it's true, and so I would, confidently recommend to someone that if you follow these steps, it's going to lead you to Christianity. But it's only because it's true. It's not because I've rigged the outcome. And as a matter of fact, it's just self-evident that these principles, these ground rules for a search for truth, make sense. Okay, so let's look at what they are. And again, I want to emphasize what I mentioned last week, that a search for truth and to value truth is good for Christians too. In fact, it's even better because we're called to follow God, and God is the God of truth. That's one of his attributes. When we study his attributes, we'll see. So let's look at, I've got 4 ground rules for a search for truth. Number 1 is an attitude of humility is in order. And this has to do with seeing things in proper perspective, because we can get a little cocky in the 21st century because of all of the knowledge that is available to us, all of the discoveries that have been made. And with the internet, we're actually literally in what's called the information age. And so we really have a lot of information. There is a lot of stuff that we've found out. I mean, we have actually discerned how to split the atom and harness nuclear power. Prior to moving to Florida, Karina and I lived on the top of Palomar Mountain. And the Palomar Mountain, we could see the observatory. We could see out our family room window. It was a couple of ridges over from our home. And at that observatory, it was discovered that the universe is composed of multiple, innumerable galaxies. Up until the time that the 200-inch telescope was constructed on the top of Palomar Mountain, all we knew, we thought that our Milky Way galaxy and the universe were synonymous. That was the universe. But when they had the more powerful telescopes, they began to discern, galaxies upon galaxies. So all of that has been discovered. At this point in time, we have actually mapped, the last time I gave this class, I couldn't make this statement because that was about 7 years ago. We have actually mapped the human genome, and so we understand a lot about how what the constituent building blocks of human nature and also other species as well. We have access to history. We basically can give you an outline of human history. And, it just goes on. The whole digital revolution. So there's just so much knowledge that it's easy to become cocky. And it's easy to think, what do I have to learn from a book? And I'm again not assuming Christianity, so I'll give multiple examples. What could I possibly learn from the Vedas, Hindu scriptures written, centuries before Christ? Buddha, who lived in the 6th century BC, Jesus Christ, who obviously lived in the 1st century AD, Muhammad, who lived in the 6th century AD, all of these different religious teachers. What could I possibly learn from them? They didn't know about all of these different things that I just described. Well, an attitude of humility is in order because actually number one, a lot was worked out a long time ago. You go back to 3rd century Greece, and all of the basic branches of science and knowledge were already established at that point in time. And the great work in the area of philosophy was accomplished in the 4th century BC. And of course, the Bible, written from approximately 1400 BC through the 1st century AD, nobody's been able to come along and improve upon that. I mean, it's very profound. Even if you don't accept it as literally true, you still have to recognize that it is a very profound description of the human condition. And so you realize, number one, that religious truth and scientific truth are not the same thing, and that even people who did not have access to scientific knowledge and advanced learning such as we have today did some very profound thinking about the human condition, the human plight, what is the problem of man, what might be its solution, way before we started steamrolling into the 21st century and all the explosion of knowledge that we've seen in the last 500 years or so. So all of that, there's an attitude of humility, and it's just recognizing not only that a lot of great work was done a long time ago, but also recognizing that the more that we learn, the more we realize that we don't know. I mean, the more that we discover about the extent of the universe, the more we realize that we haven't even seen yet. We thought, in Adam, the word atom means the basic building block. And so when the atom was discovered, they thought that was it. But then they discovered the subatomic realm, neutrons, protons, and everything, quarks and all of these smaller and smaller entities. It seems like the more we go into the depths of creation, the more we find that there is. And, as far as human nature goes, we're a mystery to ourselves. Of all the behavioral sciences, the most inexact one and the one that can lead you astray the most easily is psychology, because we're studying ourselves. And there's just so much about human nature that remains a mystery. So there's a lot of reasons to approach a search for truth with humility and to realize, like I described 2 weeks ago when I was studying philosophy, I was studying a particular philosopher and I would think, oh, well, this guy's, he's solved the problem, and then I'd read, it was going through historically, about a generation later, another philosopher comes up and pokes holes in what that guy proposed, and you go, okay, I can see that really doesn't work. So just to realize our own humility, our own limitations, and not to presume. There can be an attitude right now that, and this is not going to be the case in this church, but it's the case in this culture, that certain things are just givens, that we have quote unquote proven evolution. And there's a whole discipline of biblical study known as higher criticism that supposedly has proven that Moses did not really exist, and the 5 books of Moses were written by 4 different authors. And we're going to deal with that later on in this class and answer that, as well as evolution. It's assumed that the whole concept of monotheism, that is one of the 6 worldviews here, did not originate with Moses or that time period, the beginning of Abraham or anything like that, but it was something that gradually evolved. So all of these assumptions are out there which cause people to become cocky with regard to Christianity. But what I'm going to suggest is there is a fundamental error that you'll see operating again and again in the secular, non-Christian world when it comes to Christianity and when it comes to the Bible. And this is, you're going to want to write this one down. People commonly, typically assume that if a scenario can be proposed that would explain away a literal interpretation of the Bible, that the literal interpretation has been disproved. People commonly and I'm not talking about dimwits, I'm talking about some of the greatest minds. Richard Dawkins would be one of them, a very brilliant scientist, biologist. They assume, but there's so many others, it's common. Anyone who's been through the secular university system has experienced this again and again. And it's an error that we ourselves can fall into. I've seen people whose faith is upset because they've heard a proposal, an alternate proposal for the Bible, for creation. Evolution is an alternative scenario that's been developed that would eliminate the need for a literal belief in the creation that we read about in Genesis. Or people come up with a scenario for how the books of Moses were written that does not involve Moses. And on and on. Currently, there's the scenario, like the Big Bang Theory, which is widely accepted in science right now, coincides with a biblical view of creation. At least many people believe that it does. I'm one of them. However, when I was arguing with an atheist about this, he simply proposed to me multiple universes, completely eliminates the need for a creator. Well, multiple universes is an idea that people have proposed right now. And, I can't say that it won't be proven, but it hasn't been proven. There's been no compelling evidence. So all these different things, just the mere fact that people propose a scenario for an alternative interpretation for the Bible does not disprove the Bible. And this is the error that is repeated again and again. So you got to hold people's feet to the fire and ask them for the proof for the position that they're proposing. And you'll find that it's lacking. So critical thinking, that's one of the things that I hope to impart to you, not that you don't already have it, but we can all benefit from sharpening our critical thinking skills. So an attitude of humility. Number 2, this is also a very important ground rule for a search for truth. The seeker should make a personal commitment to incorporate in his or her life whatever is reasonably confirmed to be true. This is a really essential quality. If someone is searching for the truth, and I believe that this should also be descriptive of all Christians, that when we're searching for the truth, and if we already have found it in Christ, when we're searching for more of it, a greater understanding of the Bible, a greater understanding of Jesus Christ, that when this truth is found, and you're never going to have 100% assurance or knowledge of any topic, but you've got a reasonable basis for concluding that it's true. There's always going to be alternative arguments that people have, and like, I can't scientifically prove God. I can't go to if I could go to the opposite end of the universe and explore every square inch of it, I still wouldn't find God. Okay, so there are things that have to be taken on faith, but faith is not a blind faith. Faith, as defined by the Bible, is believing in that which you have not seen. It's not believing in that which has no reason, no support, no evidence. It's not an irrational faith. It's not a leap into the dark and you hope that when you land on the other side that the truth will be there. And a lot of people in Christianity have defined faith in exactly that way. But that's not how you see it defined in the book of Acts, in the epistles, in the Gospels, or in the entire Bible. God recognizes that we are reasonable beings, that we need to have reason for faith, and He's always gone out of His way to supply abundant reason for faith in the form of miracles, fulfilled prophecy, and a teaching that is coherent with reality, a teaching that is profound and that answers the deepest issues of our lives. So God, recognizes our need for reasons. So therefore, we really need, in our search for truth, to be willing to incorporate whatever we find to be true on a reasonable basis. In other words, the preponderance of the evidence is in support of this position. Now, Christians have a state of absolute assurance. In other words, I am absolutely assured that the Bible is true, even though scenarios could be constructed that would say, well, this is all just a quirk of your mind, and the disciples were master deceivers. They concocted this whole resurrection story. You can always come up with alternative scenarios that I can't absolutely disprove. But those scenarios are unreasonable compared to simply the scenario that they saw something that transformed their lives and turned cowards into people who gave their lives for this thing. What caused Peter to go from someone who denied the Lord 3 times and the disciples, people who were cowering in the upper room, hiding from the authorities, to people who said to those very authorities, this Jesus whom you crucified, God has made both Lord and Christ. And then when they command them, do not speak in this man's name, whether it is right to obey God or to obey man, we leave to you. We're only talking about weeks between when they proclaimed that to the very people responsible for Christ's crucifixion and when they were hiding from those very same people and denying their Lord. What happened that created that change? Well, it was seeing Jesus Christ. And so, there is a reasonableness to it, but our absolute assurance is, the gap between, let's say, 97% assurance and 100% assurance is filled in by the Holy Spirit. That's not an objective argument you can give to other people, but it is a subjective confirmation that it's like it says in Romans 8, His Spirit bears witness with our spirit that we are the children of God. And like John says in 1 John, we know that we have eternal life by this, that He's given us of His Spirit. And so the Holy Spirit brings it to the 100% level. But even prior to that, you have a rational basis for believing and committing your life to Christ. And so this is what we are committed to, is to incorporate this truth. Now, when we don't incorporate the truth, and yet we're still claiming to be seekers, then what we're doing is kidding ourselves, and we're involved in a mind game. And unfortunately, I have just seen so many people who say that they are seekers of truth, and yet their lives never change. And these are people who have not made this commitment. And for them, they like the adventure of the search so much they don't want to ever arrive anywhere. And furthermore, they probably are not willing to make the changes that would be required at arriving at the truth. So I remind you of the place where I was at with my own personal testimony, and that was after I landed at the Shiloh house in Ashland, Oregon, and it finally became clear to me that I either had to surrender to Jesus Christ or I would be living a lie. the thought did come into my mind, just go back out on that freeway, pretend this didn't happen. Think of all the power you were getting. Think of what your friends would say. You don't want to live the Christian life. All those thoughts were going through my mind. I could have yielded to that. I could have gone back out on the freeway and continued to profess to be a seeker of truth. And only I, in my deepest, I could even suppress what had happened, and only on a deep level in my conscience and in my heart would I know that I was a hypocrite. And I submit to you that there are a lot of people who made that wrong choice and that are out there right now claiming to be seekers of truth. And furthermore, a lot of people start out not with the same wide open openness to whatever might be true that I did. They start out, for example, a lot of these New Age seekers, they've already concluded that science has disproved the Bible, and that in the 21st century, the most rational belief would be pantheism, the worldview that says that all is one, God is mine, we're a part of God. So when they launch their search for truth, it's just which version of pantheism am I going to accept? But they're not open to giving it up entirely. That's an error. Again, that's a lack of the first thing, the humility. So when you're searching for the truth, you need to be open to all options, and you need to be prepared to incorporate them in your life. And from a biblical perspective, when people don't, it can actually become, instead of a virtuous thing to be a seeker of truth, it can become a greater evil. Because biblically, we know that the nature of the fall was that the fall of man and in the Garden of Eden was that the serpent came to Eve and proposed to her that if she disobeyed the one command that God had given her, and she partook of the forbidden fruit, that her eyes would be open, and she would know the difference between good and evil, and she would become a god. Okay, and so it was the appeal then to pride, the appeal then to becoming independent of God, to becoming his equal, that was the impetus for disobeying that command and entering into sin. In other words, it was the impetus for the fall of man, for all of the misery that we've seen since. Okay, so it's interesting that the symbol of occult knowledge, which is very much similar to Eastern mysticism or any form of mysticism out there, is the serpent, and that the promise of it all is you shall become God. And so what people do then, if they're not open to the truth as whatever it might be, they can end up, and they define truth so that it excludes other possibilities besides this Eastern mysticism, this New Age type belief. What they end up doing then is embracing as the solution what was actually the cause of their problem in the first place, which is a rebellion against God. They see as the solution, the gospel of the New Age is, you shall become as God, you will create your own reality. You don't need any God independent of yourself. You don't have to answer to God and his laws. You're not a mere creature. You can become one with God, and you can actually manipulate God, defined as an impersonal force, to advance your own evolution into godhood. And that's the whole premise of the occult and the New Age. That's the underlying reality there. And so if I would have gone back out on that freeway because I thought I was becoming Christ, I thought I was achieving God realization, I would have simply made a moral choice not to respond to the truth, but instead to follow the impulses of sin, and I just simply would have brought sin and rebellion and idolatry up. The sin of the garden, I would have simply enshrined that as the ultimate reality and as the greatest religious achievement. And I would have been lost, horribly lost. Not to mention, in my particular case, I was on the verge of becoming demon-possessed, if you recall. And if I had gone back out on that freeway, I would have been going out there on the freeway with the devil. And that thought did occur to me when I was weighing my options. Okay, the next ground rule for a search for truth no possibility is excluded because of its fashionableness or unfashionableness, prominence or obscurity, familiarity or unfamiliarity, or personal distaste distastefulness to the seeker. And again, this is really important because I really see people who claim to be seeking for the truth often influenced unduly by what is considered to be acceptable, fashionable, cool, in the time in which we live, politically correct. And so a lot of possibilities are ruled out at the outset because they don't fit that description. And yet, if we're really searching for the truth, we have to, ahead of time, be prepared to accept that which would make us uncool, which is what I did when I became a Jesus freak. It was like mortifying in a sense, but then when I got on the other side of it and was actually living it, I didn't care about anything like that at all because I now saw things differently, and I could see that this was the way to be, and furthermore, that all of that other stuff was pandering to my vain ego, and seeking the approval of people that I thought were hip and cool, and I glory in not being hip and cool now because that's the way of the cross, and God's ways are foolishness to man, but to those that are being saved, the operative word there is saved, it is the glory and power of God, So that's fine, but we really have got to be willing to accept the truth no matter what it is and not presume, as far as familiarity or unfamiliarity goes. One of the things that made it hard for me to consider Christianity was it was the dominant religion in my country and culture, and it was something that I grew up with, the Catholic version of Christianity. Is familiar with all these concepts, and so I reasoned, how could the truth be something that I grew up with? It seemed much more possible that the truth was something more esoteric and remote, like I might have to climb a Himalayan mountain and find, I was going to say loincloth guru, but it would be awfully cold up in the top of the Himalayas in a loincloth. However, I think some of them actually do punish themselves quite a bit and might actually do that, but just to climb up to some mountaintop and find some guru, and this is completely foreign to my culture, and it looks so spiritual and esoteric and mystical. This is where the truth would be, somewhere like that. But the reality is, you can't, all of those kinds of considerations, that the truth, and other people presume, okay, this is what I grew up with. I grew up in the PCA church, and this is what I was taught, therefore it's the truth. Well, I hate to instill any doubt in somebody in that situation, because that's not my goal here. However, let's make sure our faith is based on the right thing, and realize that just because you grew up in a religion doesn't make it true. You have got to independently verify that it is true, So your relationship to it is an accident of birth, and it doesn't speak to either the truthfulness or falseness. The Christianity, I believe, is true for people who grew up in India, like Ravi Zacharias. Despite the fact that it wasn't the religion they grew up with, and it's true for me despite the fact that it was the religion I grew up with. It just happens to be the truth. So you can't rule things out on that basis and say that it's just not familiar to me, therefore it can't be true, or it is familiar to me, therefore it can't be true. And you have to be willing to be unhip, uncool, unpolitically correct, because the reality is that whatever the truth is, it's got to be transcendent. It can't just be completely represented by any one culture, and so you can't just assume that your culture has a corner on the truth. Truth has got to be something greater, grander, more transcendent than that. And so, a major ground rule for the truth then is a willingness to be unfashionable if following the truth requires that. Okay, the final ground rule, and this is the key one, I've already discussed it somewhat. They're all important, but this one is one that we're going to be referring to again and again because it actually provides our method for evaluating our options. And that is, without assuming all truths can be fathomed. You know, some people say you can't know the truth. It's too grand. It's too ultimate. Truth cannot be known. We can only know mundane things. We can know scientific information. We can know historical information. But we can't know ultimate truth. But that, again, is an assumption that hasn't been proven. You can't assume that, and it's a self-defeating assumption. If your desire is to find the truth, you shouldn't assume at the outset that it can't be found. On the other hand, it would be inappropriate to simply assume at the outset that everything about truth can be understood, because it is a very real possibility that aspects of truth are beyond our ability to comprehend. So you have to go into it with this attitude. Without assuming that all truths can be fathomed, whatever truths we do learn will not be irrational. They will be internally and externally consistent, i.e., veridical, which is a technical term, and you've probably never heard it before, but it's a good one because it means coherent with reality. This is really a key point that I will end this morning's message with. And it's really going to be the dominant theme as we go through. It's going to be our criteria as we go through. If we're searching for the truth, a lot of people think that the best way to confirm truth, to prove something, to give yourself a basis for believing something, is to prove it scientifically. And among secular humanists and many scientists, but far from all scientists, it is believed that you shouldn't believe anything that hasn't been demonstrated scientifically. But there is a flaw in that reasoning when it comes to a search for truth. Because what this search is about, and what we're discussing in this class, is the search for ultimate reality. This is a key phrase you're going to hear again and again, and so it's important to understand what it means. Ultimate reality is that which was true, existed before all other things, and is responsible for all other things coming into being. It is, a lot of things you can look at them and say, okay, this came into existence at this time, and it was brought about by this other further back thing in a series of causes and effects. None of those things are ultimate. Furthermore, they're not necessary. They might not have existed and everything else could have existed. Okay, they're not necessary beings. So ultimate reality is what we could also call the necessary being, or the uncaused first cause. And so what we're looking for here is that which you need not go beyond to find an explanation of how everything else got here. That which holds the answer to existence itself. Okay? So that is what we're searching for. That's an important concept to understand. Now, in searching for that, you got to be careful what you're presupposing, because people can begin inappropriately narrowing the options and ruling certain things out that haven't been disproved, and then only working within what they have left in there. And this is what a lot of scientists and secular humanists do. What they do is they presuppose materialistic naturalism, that all that exists and all that ever existed was the universe, and that the universe is composed of matter, physical stuff, okay? That is a possibility. It's half of one of the 6 worldviews. I've got one of the worldviews is naturalism, and there are 2 forms of naturalism that are opposite but are both naturalistic, materialism and then pantheism. One says all reality is spirit and material is just an illusion. Another says all of reality is matter, and spirit or non-material entities are just an illusion or a quirk of the mind, chemicals working in your brain. Now, the materialistic naturalist, another way of describing this person is the atheist. And also what you could call the scientist, someone who has made science, not scientist, oh, that didn't come out right, someone who believes in scientism, the philosophy / religion of scientism, that science explains everything. They are engaging in circular reasoning. They are presupposing what they want to prove at the level of worldviews. They are assuming that all that exists is matter because they have a preference for everything to be explained by science. However, this is the key point, science itself does not prove that. You cannot, no tests that have been done in the realm of science has proven how the universe got here. Like right now, they're building the super collider, and they've been struggling with getting it off the ground. They've had to run into problems, but they're trying to simulate the conditions of the Big Bang to explain how all of this could have started in the first place. But even if they succeed with that, and they're having a hard time with it, they will not have explained how the pre-existing stuff that resulted in the Big Bang got here, okay? So science has yet, through scientific methodology, to prove how the universe got here in the first place, or if it's eternal, and the Big Bang suggests that it isn't. The Big Bang suggests that everything came out of nothing at a specific point in time, this massive explosion, and that the universe is still expanding outward from that little point of starting place. So what science does, this is a great confusion, and this is why intelligent design is so resisted, and there's such a battle, is that people assume intelligent design is faith and religion because it involves the possibility of God or some intelligence behind the complexity that we see in life. But what they don't realize is they commit the same assumption in the opposite direction, which is just as unproven. And why should something, just because it's associated with religion, but there could be an explanation for life, be ruled out just because atheists prefer a material explanation? There's nothing that what science does is it simply observes and explains physical processes, physical phenomena. It does not answer questions beyond the physical. And yet it's those questions beyond the physical that we most need. We're looking for purpose. We're looking for meaning. We're looking to understand if there is a greater purpose to life. Why should we conclude at the outset that there can't be without having proven it scientifically? You see? So it's really important to understand that you can't use science to prove any of these worldviews. You've got to have a different method of proving it. And that's what I'm suggesting here. And it is this method that I've described here, that it has to be veridical. It has to be coherent with reality. And so you use logic to test worldviews. And this is what you test about them. Number one, are they internally consistent? Do all of the different elements of the belief system cohere, fit together, harmonize, or are there internal conflicts with the worldview? And we're going to see when we consider polytheism next week, the first worldview, it's really got a problem on this level. Internal contradictions within the system. Okay, so it has to be internally consistent. The next thing is it has to be externally consistent. It has to be consistent with the world as we find it and with human nature as we find it. And when we study naturalism, materialistic naturalism, pantheistic naturalism, we're going to find that it has a big problem on this level. It may be an internally consistent system, but it's not consistent with what we find. Now, Atheists and people of other beliefs besides Christianity or the Bible will say, we've got a problem here with the internal consistency thing, that the Bible contradicts itself and so forth. Well, there are good answers to that we will get to when we get to the Bible. But at this point, we're not even dealing with the Bible, we're dealing with a world view. We're not trying to prove Christianity per se. We're seeing if theism, which is the worldview that Christianity fits in, is coherent, internally consistent. And there's no doubt about that. And so is it also externally consistent? And another way, when you're testing external consistency, does it conflict with science? Does it, if it makes scientific claims, but it's been clearly refuted by science, then you got a problem. And they would say that is the case with evolution. I would argue against that. Does it conflict with history? Well, with that theory of, it's called I don't want to weigh you down with this, but higher criticism, the four other authors besides Moses, they would say that, well, yeah, it conflicts with history. Well, I'd say that it doesn't. But, the question is, does it, if you make claims about history, if you make claims about science, they better cohere with that. But also about human nature. And here is a key test. You should be able, if a worldview is true, you should be able to live according to that worldview consistently. You should not reach certain points in your life where you have to set that worldview aside and live as though another worldview is true because you can't apply your own worldview to this situation. And that is a key weakness in naturalism, in atheism and New Age or Eastern pantheism. They can't consistently live according to their worldview. All right, so if you run into these inconsistencies, then that should be a major tip-off that there's something fundamentally wrong with the worldview. This is how you test worldviews, is consistency, internal, external consistency. Okay, well, we still have just a few minutes. I wanted to at least get through my ground rules here. So I open it up for questions and answers.
What about an example of an external inconsistency with an Eastern or a pantheistic view?
Would you like to repeat the question
Yeah, the question was, what about an example of an external inconsistency with the pantheistic view? It's hard, most of their problems are on an internal inconsistency level because they're not making claims about science or about history. The whole definition of the system is the world is an illusion. Oh, that leads me right into an answer to give you. The external consistency is pantheism believes all is one, and there are no distinctions. There's only one being in the entire universe. That seems to be contradicted by the fact that I'm looking at several beings here right now, and I'm looking at several objects. Okay, so it certainly doesn't fit the world as we find it. Now they have an explanation for that. That it's a trick of the mind. It's a play that God, in other words, their God is this, another internal inconsistency is nobody can continually define God as an impersonal force. They end up speaking of God at times as if he's a person instead of an it. And so their explanation for the world, which is a really weak explanation, and I will be getting into this when we deal with pantheism, is that God was just alone in infinity, bored, and so came up with a sport, a game, a play, a drama to amuse himself, and broke himself up into all these different objects and engaged in this dream of the universe that he, instead of just being himself or itself, that he was all these other people living out their lives. And so then the whole goal of this drama is eventually, we're being driven by the law of karma, but eventually we reach a point where we want to transcend this wheel that we're on and we seek enlightenment and we realize all is one and we balance our karma and we get out of this rat race. And so then that's the end. Well, that's, if all of life is just a game to keep an impersonal, consciousness entertained, that doesn't give me a really satisfying explanation for Haiti or a real strong reason to go there and try to help people or to contribute. In other words, it doesn't provide a sufficient basis for ethics, humanitarianism, and so forth. And that's why it was when Christian missionaries went into India, that you had the beginning of that. And then they started developing their own missions because they felt like they were being outcompeted by Christians who were helping. So you do see pantheistic mission things, but they're copying Christian. So ideas have consequences. And when you believe that life is nothing but a game, then there's less meaning or purpose to life. We're searching for meaning or purpose here. Yes, Phil?
Yeah, Mr. Elliot. To respond to a point you made earlier with regard to the rules of engagement and all this, you're the theist. I'm going to role play the atheist here. You demand proof from me for my position. I would respond simply that I don't need to dignify you with a response. The burden of proof is so unbalanced. I can just dismiss you out of hand and walk away. I don't need to prove anything. In fact, all I have to do is raise any minor objection at all, and I've won. So there are some people who you cannot reason with.
Right, but what I'm presupposing here is that finding a meaning and purpose in life is important. Okay, so that is, if a person hasn't reached a point where they see that, it's going to be hard. You're going to have to talk them into that. However, I think it's for me, it was a self-evident truth. It was consistent with my nature, that I was looking for a reason and purpose to life. And if a reason and purpose of life is important, then we have to have a rational, consistent means for weighing our options. And that's what I would come back to that person with. If you just don't even want to entertain the possibility that you might be here for a higher purpose and just rule that out at the option and just go off and live out your life until you die and never know why you were here, and if you don't consider that important, well, then that's your choice. But if you do consider it important to find a purpose for being here, then what I'm proposing is not stacking the deck in favor of Christianity. It's simply equitable, fair, logically consistent ground rules for conducting a search. George?
Yeah, you said last week and this week that we're not assuming anything.
We're assuming logic.
No, you're assuming rationality, humility, purpose, meaning, truth, morality, coherence, logic. There's a lot of things that we have to assume. We just can't come with a clean slate.
What I'm saying by not assuming things is one worldview over another. In other words, yes, of course, and that fits in with what Phil and I were discussing. Certain things are considered, you wouldn't be engaged in this search if certain things weren't valuable and important. And yes.
So we're assuming these things.
We are assuming, we're not assuming anything. I'm starting out with logic as the only assumption. Then I'm arguing in favor. Okay,
Well,
what you got to realize, George, is we're going to be building a whole system, a whole construct of assumptions. I'm not asking anybody to take anything for granted except logic itself, which is it's self-refuting if you don't, because you're going to give me reasons why you don't need to do it, which means that you buy into it too. Okay, that's the only thing that we're assuming. Then I am arguing why these other things are important.
Well, in point B, you say the seeker should make, but the word should implies a moral issue. It's not even logical now, it's a moral issue. So we have to assume not only logic, but we have to assume morality as well, do we not?
Right, but I can argue for morality and do argue for morality, so I've got a great class here. You guys are going to, really hold my feet to the fire, I can tell. But I need to let everybody go because it's time. We're 5 minutes past time.
Can you hang on to that talk and we can pick that up when we come back? I think there's some good issues here to talk about. I mean, we have to start with some assumption and come to some conclusion. And in that process, and we have to have consistent values and consistent logic to do that. But I think it's a fair question to assume. Sorry that we're out of time this morning. Darn, it always seems that way. But we will continue the pace, and I encourage you to think about what Elliot has said this morning. Think about it, pray about it too, and sort of come back with some questions as you sort of digest everything that he's talking about, because this is not something that you can just get quickly and, and then it just makes sense and say, well, it's okay, and it's not supposed to either. So think about it and come back with some good questions. All right, service is going to take place in a bit, so welcome. Good morning.
Well done.